It is me. I am back. And I've made a little mini zoo using the Conservation Pack DLC, starting with actually making the zoo, on hard mode of course. I spent quite a lot of time trying to decide what path to use and where to place said path, using this very unappealing path to make a large oval shape, after which I added the staff areas using the pre-built Conservation Pack buildings. My favorite of which being the Research Center because it has this fun honeycomb bee design going on. I then proceeded to change the path to something much more pleasant looking, after which I chose which of the 4 habitat animals in the Conservation Pack I wanted to add first, deciding to start off strong with the Amur leopard. I added a small curved path off to the side of my initial path, which I used to shape the barrier, which was made out of chain link and wood. I also used the little glass option you can find in the panel to the right to make the wood partially glass. And after making all that climb-proof, I had the leopards brought to the habitat. I started this habitat by adding a water area, after which I pulled out the foliage and added a very large olive tree, along with a few much smaller olive trees. I placed quite a lot of bushes around, after which I added whatever this plant is around the habitat. I placed a few cattail reeds around the water, and that was the granary finished, and it was now rock time. I added a few larger rocks around the areas that I thought could use a little more pizzazz, before going in with some smaller rocks, after which it was time to add the shelter. And I did something I don't usually do, which was using the in-game shelters, kind of, at least. I modified the shelter a little bit so that it would match the rest of the habitat a bit better, and I initially used this wooden sloped roof one, but the leopards could jump on it and escape, so I switched it to the flat roof option and there was no longer a risk of being mauled by a leopard in my zoo. And after adding bedding, the shelter was done, and it was now time for all the enrichment, which included finding a place to put a climbing structure, which I had not kept in mind while setting up the rest of the habitat, but it conveniently looked nice in this back corner. And it did clip into this cluster of rocks, but it kinda looked intentional, so I left it. And after fixing the train to the leopard's liking, and adding donation bins and education speakers, this habitat was done. I had in mind where the rest of the habitats in this zoo were going to go, so I redid my path to map that out. I also placed the only exhibit animal in this DLC pack, which is the axolotl. And then I forgot to hit the record button before adding this little pond, after which I placed down a barrier made of wood and glass, which is going to be for this funny monkey, which is called a Siamang. And their faces remind me of the monsters from the movie Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, which if you haven't seen, good for you, because that movie is absolutely horrifying. That being said, I made the monkey's habitat too small and had to expand it. And when I went to buy the monkeys, I ran into the biggest hurdle of them all, being poor. So I took a trip to my cheetah zoo to make myself not poor. Very nice. And after making my way back to the conservation zoo, I bought some of the monkeys I wanted. However, the market didn't have all of the monkeys I wanted, so I decided to loop back around to the monkeys at a later time and switch gears to make a combined habitat for both the scimitar horned oryx and the Przewalski horse. I made a large barrier out of chain link and glass, after which I waited a while for at least one of each animal to be brought to the habitat, during which I decided that the wood barrier with glass would look better than just the plain glass. And with a good chunk of the animals brought to the habitat, I was ready to get into it. Also, these 2 species don't actually get any interspecies bonus for being housed together, and it's not actually stated anywhere that they can be housed together. However, they do have a lot of overlap in what they like in a habitat, and they didn't immediately kill each other, so it's fine. I started with adding a few of these boom palm trees around, after which I placed a water source in the habitat, and went about placing some of these hawthorn bushes around. I was going to add some cattail reeds around the water, but these guys didn't like that, so I used some common reeds instead. And to finish off the greenery, I placed quite a lot of drin grass throughout the habitat. I added all their enrichment and went about placing a large shelter, along with a smaller one in the back. And after placing bedding underneath both of the shelters, it was rock time. I started by placing a few larger clusters before going back in with smaller rocks, along with adding more of the drin grass around said rocks, after which I went about fixing the terrain to their liking. My OBS also did this funny thing where it froze for whatever reason, which luckily didn't really affect anything, but peculiar nonetheless. I did add donation bins and education speakers to the habitat, but that was after my OBS froze, so you'll just have to take my word for it. That was a wrap for this habitat though, and I was ready to jump back into setting up the Siamang habitat, starting with making sure that it was climb-proof, after which I had the monkeys delivered, where I then changed all the terrain to short grass so I could see what I was doing. And with that done, I pulled up the greenery where I found these coastal mangroves. I also found these rather amazing lipstick palm trees, so I placed those around too. However, they didn't really look much like trees, so I did place a few of these real-looking trees around also, along with some of these tiny banana trees. I also somehow forgot to add the climbing structure before placing down a bunch of trees, but I did find a few structures that fit well around all the trees, after which I placed some bushes and blue lotus plants around, paired with some of these little leafy bits, which I placed too much of and had to delete some. And after adding a few more green bits, it was rock time. Starting with large rock clusters placed mostly around the outer barrier, and then I found these strange long rocks, which I turned on their ends to make these smaller rocks. Kind of a convoluted way to get small rocks, but it worked. I placed shelters in the back and added their enrichment before placing bedding underneath said shelters. I also placed another shelter at the front because they're greedy and wanted more. And after fixing the terrain to their liking, I placed donation bins and education speakers, and this habitat was done. Which leads into adding the final touches to this zoo, starting on a noteworthy point, this very cute baby oryx. Moving on, I placed down a bathroom and added food and water shops, along with an information booth by the front of the zoo, before going throughout the entire zoo and placing down benches, trash cans, education boards, and conservation boards, along with a few education activity centers, which I placed by the habitats. I also turned on marketing and placed a few vending machines around the zoo so I could get closer to 5 stars, after which I copied a cluster of trees to decorate the zoo with, paired with some of these nettle clusters to fill the ground in with. And to finish off decorations, I found a bunch of these chunky statues, which I placed throughout the zoo, and that was the conservation zoo finished. I hope you enjoyed watching. If you did enjoy watching, maybe consider subscribing. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.